Thank you, Excellency, and the delegation for the statements. We will now continue with our interactive dialogue, and I will give the floor to Azerbaijan.
Madam Vice President, Azerbaijan warmly welcomes the delegation of the Kingdom of Cambodia and thanks for the presentation of its national report. We welcome Cambodia's commitment to the UPR process and the progress made in protecting and promoting of human rights since last review. We applaud the legislative and policy measures in a number of areas, including the launch of the National Disability Strategic Plan 2019-2023 and efforts in promoting of the rights of persons with disabilities, as well as the execution of the National Strategic Plan of Anti-Corruption by Cambodia. In a constructive spirit, we offer Cambodia following recommendations. 1. Continue taking actions in combating corruption, including through education, prevention, and law enforcement. 2. Continue its efforts to promote inclusion and support for persons with disabilities. In conclusion, we wish Cambodia a very successful review. I thank you.
Thank Azerbaijan for your statement and give the floor to Bahrain by video.
Mr. President, the Kingdom of Bahrain welcomes the delegation of the Kingdom of Cambodia and thanks it for the presentation of its national report, and we recognize Cambodia's ongoing efforts to review legislations and implement legal reforms in accordance with international human rights obligations. In the spirit of positive dialogue, my delegation wishes to make the following recommendations. 1. Continue its efforts to protect labor rights, particularly in the garment industry, which employs a large portion of the workforce. 2. Consider enhancing legal framework in order to prevent and combat all forms of discrimination against women. We wish Cambodia success in this UPR session. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank Bahrain and give the floor to Bangladesh.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. Bangladesh welcomes the distinguished delegation of Cambodia and thanks their presentation of national report. We recognize the steps taken by Cambodia to implement the recommendations from its last UPR. We acknowledge Cambodia's significant progress and achievements in poverty reduction, rural development, and infrastructure improvements. In the spirit of cooperation, Bangladesh offers the following recommendations to Cambodia. 1. Continue efforts to establish a national human rights institution in accordance with Paris principles. 2. Take further measures to combat human trafficking by implementing its national strategic plan for counter-trafficking in persons. And 3. Intensify efforts to prioritize education, improve teaching quality, and expand infrastructure to ensure inclusive and quality education for all. We wish Cambodia success in its review. I thank you.
I thank Bangladesh for your statement and give the floor to Belarus.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. We welcome the distinguished delegation from Cambodia. We note the determination of the government and the tangible, considerable results achieved by the government to guarantee social economic progress, the social support for vulnerable categories of the population, and expanded access to quality education and medical services. And we recommend the following. 1. To continue to improve systems for protection of the rights of the child, including through the National Plan of Action for the elimination of the reduction of child labour and the elimination of the worst forms of child labour 2016-2025 and related documents. 2. To continue to implement measures to combat trafficking in human beings and to strengthen the potential of the National Council to counter trafficking and to continue measures to guarantee the rights of persons with disabilities. Thank you.
I thank Belarus and give the floor to Belgium.
Madam Vice President, Belgium congratulates Cambodia with recent progress on social protection. Nevertheless, Belgium believes more can be achieved and recommends the government of Cambodia to amend the law on trade unions in consultation with workers, trade unions and other stakeholders to bring it into full compliance with ILO Convention 87 and 98. Investigate all cases of violence against journalists, human rights defenders, environmental defenders, civil society members, political opposition leaders attacked, harassed or intimidated for exercising their right to freedom of expression and release those detained on this basis. develop a national action plan to prevent child marriage and teenage pregnancy, and allocate appropriate resources for its implementation. I thank you.
I thank Belgium for your statement and give the floor to Bhutan.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. Bhutan welcomes the delegation of Cambodia to the 4th UPR cycle and thanks the delegation for the report. We note the measures to promote and protect human rights, including the ongoing efforts in establishing a national human rights institution, the launch of the strategy for growth, employment, equity and efficiency, and the focus on accelerating progress towards achieving gender equality and women's empowerment, as well as the elimination of all forms of violence against women and girls. We commend Cambodia for the significant reduction in poverty rate and welcome the launch of the various programs, including infrastructure development to improve the living standards, especially in rural areas. While noting the concerted efforts, we would like to recommend the following. 1. Continue efforts in implementing the National Disability Strategy and consider enacting a law on rights of persons with disabilities. 2. Continue its efforts in combating trafficking in persons through effective implementation of the law on suppression of human trafficking and sexual exploitation. We wish the delegation a successful review. I thank you.
I thank Bhutan for your statement and give the floor to Bolivia by video.
Bolivia da la bienvenida.
Bolivia welcomes the distinguished delegation of Cambodia. We're grateful for the presentation of the 4th report as well as their constructive involvement with the UPR. We hail the policies related to signing the rights of the land use for indigenous peoples, as well as a focus on gender equality in the land policy. We hail the programme for multilingual education for indigenous children. Bolivia respectfully recommends that 1, it consider ratifying the International Convention on the Protection of the Rights of all migrant workers and members of their families, the optional protocol on the economic, social and cultural rights. 2, continue strengthening the normative framework on public policies to guarantee economic, social and cultural rights, particularly for indigenous people. 3, that it continue measures to reduce poverty to improve the living conditions for all the population, particularly in rural areas. 4, that it continue strengthening its standards and public policies for gender equality and combating discrimination against women, as well as participation and representation of women in leadership positions. We wish Cambodia success in this UPR.
I thank Bolivia for your statement and give the floor to Brazil.
Vice President, Brazil welcomes the delegation of Cambodia. We commend the country for the significant advances in eradicating poverty. We stress Cambodia's progress in early childhood development and primary education, alongside initiatives aimed at encouraging girls to attend school. In a constructive spirit, Brazil recommends Cambodia, 1, to adopt measures to enforce legislation on human trafficking and to develop and implement, in collaboration with international organizations and affected countries, protocols for the rescue and protection of victims, and 2, to take into consideration the right to privacy on its draft legislations about internet, cyberspace, and the digital environment. We encourage Cambodia to incorporate mechanisms for consulting local communities and indigenous people, as well as to protect their rights related to their lands and to the resources of their territories. Brazil wishes Cambodia a successful review. I thank you.
I thank Brazil for your statement and give the floor to Brunei Darussalam.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. Brunei warmly welcomes the delegation of Cambodia to Geneva and thanks them for the presentation of their national report. Firstly, we commend Cambodia in implementing the recommendations made from previous UPR cycles. It complements the government's ongoing effort for governance reform, modernization of state institutions, as well as sustainable and equitable development. Furthermore, Brunei recognizes Cambodia's commitment to public health and the well-being of its people through national policies and action plans to address universal health coverage. In the spirit of constructive engagement, we propose 2 recommendations. 1, continue to intensify efforts for the implementation of the SDGs, especially those related to quality and accessibility to education. And 2, further strengthen, streamline, and coordinate activities related to mental health. Madam Vice President, Brunei wishes Cambodia a successful review. Thank you.
I thank Brunei for your statement and give the floor to Bulgaria.
Madam Vice President,
Bulgaria welcomes the delegation of Cambodia. We commend the adoption of national plans in key domains such as healthcare, violence against women, and child labor. Bulgaria makes the following recommendations to Cambodia. 1. Introduce legislative amendments to further enhance the protection of victims of sexual and gender-based violence and ensure that cases of gender-based discrimination and violence against women, including domestic violence, are thoroughly investigated. The perpetrators are actively prosecuted and appropriately punished, and victims are provided with remedies. 2. Ensure the effective enforcement of existing domestic legislation as regards to trafficking of human beings and to provide adequate protection for victims of trafficking, in particular of women and children. And 3, pursue efforts to improve the functioning of the national education system in order to provide quality inclusive education to all children and to increase the enrollment of completion rates and reduce dropout rates at the secondary level. We wish the delegation of Cambodia a successful review. Thank you, Madam Vice President.
I thank Bulgaria for your statement and give the floor to Burkina Faso.
Merci, Madame.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. Burkina Faso wishes a warm welcome to the delegation of the Kingdom of Cambodia, and we thank them for the presentation of their national report. My delegation commends the efforts made by the government of Cambodia to eradicate child labour and to improve the conditions that women and girls victims of violence are living in, and we applaud the measures taken against trafficking in human beings through the implementation of the National Strategy for Counter-Trafficking and the establishment of the National Committee. In a constructive spirit, we would make the following recommendations to the delegation of Cambodia. 1. To pursue its efforts for the full abolition in trafficking in human beings, in particularly child trafficking. 2. To accede to the Convention on Statelessness and on the reduction of cases of statelessness. And 3. To ratify the optional protocol to the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. To conclude, my delegation wishes Cambodia a successful UPR. Thank you.
I thank Burkina Faso for your statement and give the floor to Cameroon.
Merci.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. Cameroon wishes a warm welcome to the delegation of Cambodia, and we congratulate them on their national report. My country notes with satisfaction the positive progress achieved by Cambodia in the sphere of the protection and promotion of human rights since the third cycle. In particular, the ratification of the International Convention for the Protection of All Persons from Enforced Disappearances and the steps taken with stakeholders with the assistance of OHCHR and the Asia-Pacific Forum to establish a national human rights institution. In a constructive spirit, the delegation of Cameroon would like to make the following recommendations. 1. To strengthen the fight against all forms of discrimination, in particular against women and persons with disabilities and ethnic minorities. 2. To pursue and conclude the process of creating a national human rights institution in conformity with the Paris Principles. Cameroon wishes Cambodia a successful UPR. Thank you.
I thank Cameroon for your statement and give the floor to Canada.
Merci, Madame la Vice-Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Vice President, and thank you to the delegation of Cambodia for the presentation of your national report. Canada remains greatly concerned about the situation following the elections in 2023, and we're unfortunately seeing a continuation of events in 2024. We recommend to Cambodia, 1, to allow all political parties, independent media, independent trade unions and civil society to function freely and to guarantee their rights and freedoms as protected by the Constitution. 2, to implement responsible protection mechanisms, transparent ones, to prevent and contest land expulsions which are illegal and the illegal use of protected lands. 3, to continue to make progress towards legalizing marriage between same-sex couples. And 4, to increase the representation of marginalized groups, including women, in government institutions. Thank you.
I thank Canada for your statement and give the floor to Chile.
Gracias, señora.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. We congratulate Cambodia for setting up the National Strategic Plan on Disability 2019 to 2023 and for the adoption of the third Plan of Action to prevent violence against women. With a view to continuing to make progress in respect and promotion of human rights, our country respectfully recommends that 1. It ratify the second optional protocol of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights geared at abolishing the death penalty. 2. Redouble efforts to ensure the free exercise of the right to freedom of expression, taking steps to protect journalists and human rights defenders. 3. Take measures to tackle trafficking in persons, providing legal services, reparation and rehabilitation for victims. 4. Adopt legislative measures and awareness-raising campaigns to prohibit child marriage. We wish success to Cambodia for this UPR cycle. Thank you.
Thank Chile for your statement and give the floor to China.
副主席女士，中国代表团欢迎柬埔寨建设性参加国别人。
The Chinese delegation welcomed Cambodia for the participation in the review. Cambodia implemented a lot of progress in this regard.
推进司法体制改革，促进社会正义。我们赞赏柬埔寨在促进和保护人权方面所取得的努力和成就。中方愿向柬埔寨提出3项建议。
1. Continue to reduce poverty, improve the living standard.
Please start again.
Madam Vice President, the Chinese delegation welcomes the constructive participation of Cambodia in UPR. Cambodia vigorously promotes economic development, reduces poverty, improves people's livelihood, protects the rights of certain groups. It promotes judicial reform and social justice. We appreciate the country's efforts and achievements in promoting and protecting human rights. China has 3 recommendations for the country. 1. Continue to reduce poverty, improve living standard, and bring more benefit to the people of the country. 2. Continue to improve the integrated management of water resources to protect the right of safe drinking water of the people. 3. Continue with judicial reform and achieve the vision of access to justice for all. China wishes the country success in UPR. Thank you.
I thank China for your statement and give the floor to Colombia.
Gracias, señora vice.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. Colombia welcomes the distinguished delegation of the Kingdom of Cambodia, this 4th UPR, and we wish it the best of success. Colombia welcomes the progress made by the Kingdom of Cambodia in human rights since the last cycle of the UPR, and in a constructive spirit we recommend that it first promote investigation into violations of human rights committed during the past regime, 2. Promote the amendment to the law on the prevention of domestic violence so that victims can have access to justice, 3. Drive through measures to guarantee the right to peaceful protest, 4. Join the Convention relating to the status of stateless persons and the Convention to reduce cases of statelessness. And 5, ratify the International Convention on the Protection of the Rights of All Migrant Workers and Members of their Families and the optional protocol and the second optional protocol of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. I thank you, Madam Vice President.
I thank Colombia for your statement and give the floor to Costa Rica.
Gracias, Vicepresidente.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. My country thanks Cambodia for the presentation of its report and recognises its commitment to cooperate with the OHCHR and collaborate with special rapporteurs and other special procedures of this Council. In a constructive spirit, Costa Rica recommends that it incorporate the human right to a clean, healthy, sustainable environment into national legislation, preferably at constitutional level. 2, that it ratify the second optional protocol to the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. 3, that it accelerate efforts to create an independent NHRI in step with the Paris Principles. 4, that it guarantee that the use of force during protests be exceptional and comply strictly with the principles of legality, precaution, necessity, proportionality and accountability, and provide comprehensive training regularly in human rights to the law enforcement officials that are tasked with monitoring these protests. I thank you.
I thank Costa Rica for your statement and give the floor to Croatia.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. Croatia welcomes the delegation of Cambodia and thanks them for the presentation of their national report. We commend Cambodia for hosting the OHCHR office and appreciate the country's cooperation with the HRC and its mechanisms. The National Disability Strategic Plan and efforts to promote inclusion are valuable developments for the protection of persons with disabilities. We encourage the authorities to provide an open political space free of threats and intimidation. Croatia has following recommendations. 1. Ensure free and open political space that allows opposition parties equal opportunities to run in the elections. 2. Create a specific anti-discrimination law for the protection of ethnic minorities. 3. Strengthen existing legislation with measures to prevent violence against women. And 4. Significantly strengthen efforts to prevent trafficking in persons, especially women and children. Croatia wishes Cambodia a successful review session. I thank you.
I thank Croatia for your statement and give the floor to Cuba.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Madam Vice President. We warmly welcome the delegation of Cambodia, and we're grateful for their commitment to the UPR, and we acknowledge the results achieved in implementing recommendations from previous cycles. We highlight the efforts undertaken by the country in reducing poverty, reforming governance, modernising state institutions, and sustainable, fair development. We recognise the cooperation of Cambodia with special procedures, the OHCHR, and other mechanisms from the UN for human rights. In a constructive spirit, we recommend that it, 1, continue implementing the national strategy on growth, employment, equality and efficiency with a view to strengthening the role of women as the backbone of the economy and indeed society and guarantee gender equality. 2, continue efforts to improve the quality of life of persons living with disabilities and access to a quality healthcare system. We wish Cambodia success in this 4th UPR. Thank you very much.
I thank Cuba for your statement and give the floor to Cyprus.
Madam Vice President, Cyprus welcomes the delegation of Cambodia and thanks the delegation for the presentation of its national report. We are pleased to note the progress made towards reducing the poverty rate in the country and increasing labor earnings. We welcome, furthermore, the measures taken to promote the rights of persons with disabilities, namely the adoption of the National Disability Strategic Plan 2019-2023. Cyprus would like to make the following recommendations. 1. Ratify the 2nd optional protocol to the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights in relation to the abolition of the death penalty. 2. Take concrete measures to eliminate the barriers faced by girls to enrolling and remaining in schools. 3. Strengthen efforts to combat gender-based violence, including domestic violence. 4. Adopt targeted measures, including awareness-raising programs on the harmful effects of child marriages on the health, development and education of girls. Thank you.
I thank Cyprus for your statement and give the floor to Czechia.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. Czechia welcomes the delegation of Cambodia. We commend Cambodia for cooperating with the Special Rapporteur and its stance towards the UPR process. Noting that the recommendations provided by Czechia in the previous UPR cycle are yet to be fully implemented, we wish to recommend Cambodia to strengthen efforts to prevent harassment and protect the rights of human rights defenders and journalists. Make every effort to ensure that the planned permanent mechanism for information and public opinion will not restrict access to a variety of information in order to combat false information spread. Find and apply a systemic solution in the fight against cybercrime, especially in the case of online scam centers. Accelerate the process of establishing a land register to strengthen the legal security of property regulations and rights, thereby preventing social discontent and ensuring the right to an adequate standard of living. We wish Cambodia a successful UPR. Thank you.
I thank Czechia for your statement and give the floor to Democratic People's Republic of Korea.
Madam Vice President, the DPRK delegation warmly welcomes the delegation of the Kingdom of Cambodia and notes with appreciation its national report. We commend the government of Cambodia for its efforts and tangible progress in the promotion and protection of human rights of its people through implementation of Cambodian Sustainable Development Goals between 2016 and 2030. We wish the government of Cambodia further progress in its endeavor for full enjoyment of human rights by its people and recommend the following. 1. Continue efforts to achieve economic growth aimed at raising the living standard of all people, including those living in the remote areas. 2. Continue efforts to create favorable conditions for ensuring access to free and quality education for all children. 3. Continue its efforts to improve implementation of its policies on public health and develop healthcare infrastructure in remote areas. We wish Cambodia a successful review. Thank you.
I thank Democratic People's Republic of Korea for your statement and give the floor to Denmark.
Thanks, Madam Vice President. Denmark welcomes the delegation of Cambodia and thank it for its presentation and subsequent comments made. We acknowledge Cambodia's engagement with the UN Special Rapporteur and commend efforts to improve girls' access to education. However, Denmark remains concerned about shrinking civic space, including the dissolution of political parties and closure of media outlets. Furthermore, Denmark is concerned about the arbitrary arrests, mass trials and acts of violence against human rights defenders, political opponents and journalists. Denmark recommends Cambodia to 1. Bring the law on political parties and the law on associations and non-governmental organizations into accordance with the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. And 2, immediately and unconditionally release individuals imprisoned for exercising their rights to peacefully assembly and association. Denmark wishes Cambodia a successful review. Thanks.
I thank Denmark for your statement and give the floor to Dominican Republic by video.
Gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. The delegation of the Dominican Republic welcomes the delegation of Cambodia and thanks it for the presentation of its national report. We congratulate the country for adopting the plan of action to eradicate child labour and the worst forms of child labour, as well as the National Strategic Plan to eradicate tuberculosis and to strive to diagnose tuberculosis. We recommend that they continue efforts to tackle corruption and guarantee access to justice for all segments of society, that they also apply measures to increase the capacity of the healthcare service, and that it continue to improve education and provide access for all, broadening education services to all children on an equal footing. We wish Cambodia a successful review. Thank you.
I thank Dominican Republic for your statement and give the floor to Egypt.
Madam Vice President, we welcome the high-level delegation of Cambodia. We appreciate the efforts reflected in the national report to promote and protect human rights at all levels. We welcome ongoing efforts to accede to a number of major international instruments, in particular the ICRMW. We commend the cooperation between Cambodia and international human rights mechanisms. We hail the developments relevant to the law on establishing the NHRI. We welcome efforts to reform governance, modernize state institutions, achieve sustainable development, combat corruption and human trafficking. We'd like to recommend the following. 1, continue efforts to combat poverty and provide social protection. 2, continue efforts to promote the rights of women, children, persons with disabilities, and combat all forms of discrimination. To conclude, we wish every success to Cambodia in this review. Thank you, Madam Vice President.
I thank Egypt for your statement and give the floor to Estonia.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. Estonia welcomes the delegation of Cambodia and Cambodia's engagement in the UPR process and cooperation with UN human rights mechanisms. We note the progress in the area of economic rights, but remain concerned by the curtailing of democratic and civic space, particularly of further restrictions on the rights to participate in elections, as well as increasing national online surveillance. Estonia would like to recommend to Cambodia to 1. Amend laws and regulations that unduly restrict the freedom of opinion and expression by bringing them into full compliance with human rights standards. 2. End the arbitrary interference, blocks, closure and surveillance of online and offline media and the use of repressive laws and censor and control the media. 3. Ensure universal access to sexual and reproductive health information by expanding the comprehensive sexuality education program in schools. And 4. Adopt a comprehensive anti-discrimination law to ensure full and effective protection against all forms of discrimination in all spheres. Estonia wishes Cambodia a successful review.
I thank Estonia for your statement and give the floor to Ethiopia.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. Ethiopia welcomes the delegation of Cambodia to the 46th session of the UPR Working Group. We thank the delegation for the comprehensive national report and the oral update today. Ethiopia commends Cambodia for implementing the recommendations received during the previous UPR cycles and the efforts to further promote human rights in an inclusive manner. In a spirit of constructive dialogue, Ethiopia recommends to Cambodia to 1. Continue strengthening institutional and legal frameworks to promote and protect human rights. And 2. Continue intensifying efforts to the poverty reduction and enhancement of the living standards of the people. Finally, Ethiopia wishes successful deliberation to the delegation of Cambodia in its engagement with the UPR Working Group. I thank you.
I thank Ethiopia for your statement and give the floor to Finland.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. Finland welcomes the engagement of Cambodia in the UPR process. Finland positively notes that Cambodia hosted the Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in Cambodia last December. Finland respectfully recommends 1. To ensure freedom of expression, association and peaceful assembly for all, including representatives of political parties, journalists and media workers, labor groups, human rights defenders and civil society. 2. To cease harassment, intimidation, arbitrary arrest, and unjust prosecution of political opposition, human rights defenders, journalists, and media workers and labor activists. 3. To ensure that fair trial guarantees, especially rights to access the outside world, family and lawyers, as provided in international law and standards, are respected and upheld in all cases. Finland wishes Cambodia a successful review. I thank you.
I thank Finland for your statement and give the floor to France.
Thank you. France welcomes the delegation of Cambodia and takes part in this review, keeping in mind the tragedy of the genocide that Cambodia suffered through and the rebuilding of the country since. We welcome the maintenance of the Office of the High Commission of Human Rights in Cambodia and the renewal of the mandate of Special Rapporteur and the cooperation of the Cambodian authorities with the latter. And we recommend, in a friendly spirit, firstly, to ratify the second optional protocol to the ICCPR, as the death penalty has been abolished. 2, to guarantee the full participation of all opposition parties and civil society in political life, and to free the representatives of the opposition who are currently in detention. 3, to guarantee freedom of expression for citizens and journalists in revising the Cambodian Penal Code. 4, to ensure that efforts are pursued to ensure equality of rights for LGBT+ persons. And 5, to establish an independent mechanism to settle land disputes in an equitable, participatory and transparent manner. Thank you.
Your statement and give the floor to Gambia.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. The Gambia warmly welcomes the delegation from the Kingdom of Cambodia and commend them for their commitment to human rights, highlighted by the ratification of 8 out of the 9 key international human rights treaties and numerous protocols. We applaud Cambodia's efforts and in the spirit of constructive engagement, wish to offer the following recommendations. 1. accelerate efforts to establish a national human rights institution in line with the Paris Principles. 2, accede to the International Convention on the protection of the rights of all migrant workers and members of their families. 3, adopt the laws on the protection of the rights of persons with disabilities and enhance protective services to prevent abuse and ensure the safety and well-being of all children, particularly those with disability. 4, enhance its efforts to prevent statelessness by guaranteeing the birth registration of all persons born in Cambodia and provide legal pathways to citizenship or other forms of legal status for refugees. We wish the Cambodian delegation a successful review. Thank you, Madam Vice President.
I thank Gambia for your statement and give the floor to Georgia.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. Georgia thanks the delegation of Cambodia for the presentation of the national report. My delegation positively views developments related to the adoption of the draft law of the establishment of the National Human Rights Institution in accordance with the Paris Principles, and we express hope for the timely approval of the above-mentioned legislation. We acknowledge some progress related to the fight against trafficking in persons, and we encourage the government to vigorously tackle the root causes of the human trafficking. We welcome Cambodia's cooperation with the UN human rights mechanisms, including the extension of the Memorandum of Understanding with the OHCHR and hosting of the Special Rapporteur on the Situation of Human Rights in Cambodia since 1993. Here we, Georgia, would like to recommend to Cambodia to take further steps towards adoption of the comprehensive child protection law that is based on principles and provisions of the Convention on the Rights of the Child, to bolster initiatives related to the improvement of the national education system. We wish the delegation of Cambodia a successful UPR. I thank you.
I thank Georgia for your statement and give the floor to Germany. Microphone, please.
The microphone is on. Can you hear me? Okay, thank you. Thank you, Madam Vice President. Germany welcomes the delegation of Cambodia and appreciates the government's engagement in constructive dialogues with the LGBTIQ+ community, as well as the inclusion of lesbian, bisexual, transgender persons in the National Action Plan to prevent violence against women. However, Germany remains concerned about the continued limitations and slow progress and improvement of working conditions for civil society. Germany therefore recommends Cambodia to first, take measures to ensure civic participation in political and public life without intimidation, especially with a view to limiting the use of strategic lawsuits against public participation. Second, enact legal amendments to recognize same-sex marriages as equal before the law in order to achieve non-discrimination, full equality and social inclusion of LGBTIQ+ persons in Cambodia. And third, simplify union registration and reduce regulations that limit peaceful assembly and the right to strike, and improve the protection of union leaders and workers. Germany wishes Cambodia a successful UPR. Thank you.
I thank Germany for your statement and give the floor to Ghana.
Okay. Madam Vice President, I am pleased to warmly welcome the delegation of Cambodia to this fourth UPR cycle. We commend the strong commitment made by the government of Cambodia to strengthen and accelerate the implementation of the National Action Plan on the reduction of child labor. We further applaud the launch of the National Disability Strategic Plan, which is a bold response to the commitment to promote and protect the rights of persons with disability. In the spirit of constructive dialogue, Ghana recommends the following: ratify the Convention on the Protection of the Rights of all migrant workers and members of their families, and fast-track the establishment of an independent national human rights institution in consultation with relevant stakeholders. Ghana wishes Cambodia a successful review. I thank you.
I thank Ghana for your statement and give the floor to Iceland.
Madam Vice President, Iceland welcomes the delegation of Cambodia and its national report. In the spirit of constructive engagement, Iceland recommends the following. 1. Amend the law on the prevention of domestic violence and the protection of victims and align it with the criminal and civil code, ensuring that it defines, prohibits and criminalizes all forms of GBV. 2. Ensure the accessibility and availability of appropriate, good quality sexual and reproductive health services. 3. Guarantee universal access to sexual and reproductive health information by expanding CSE in schools, vocational training programs, and out-of-school settings. 4. Adopt and implement a transparent administrative procedure for legal gender recognition based on self-determination. 5. Recognize same-sex marriages as equal before the law. 6. Ensure the effective inclusion and protection of persons of diverse socioeconomic and in relevant laws and policies. Iceland wishes Cambodia all success for its review. I thank you.
I thank Iceland for your statement and give the floor to India.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. India welcomes the delegation of Cambodia for presentation of its national report. We appreciate efforts of the government of Cambodia to establish a national human rights institution and the efforts towards improving access to healthcare services, which has resulted in reduction in maternal and infant mortality rates since the last review. In the spirit of constructive engagement, we would like to make following recommendations. 1. Continue efforts towards improving access to affordable and quality healthcare, especially for the poor and groups in vulnerable situations. 2. Continue efforts to improve the quality of education at all levels, especially in rural areas, including making primary education compulsory for all children and focus on equitable and inclusive access to education. And 3. Make efforts to reduce gender-based violence in all of its forms, including putting practical steps to reduce domestic abuse. We wish the distinguished delegation of Cambodia all success. I thank you.
I thank India for your statement and give the floor to Indonesia.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. Indonesia welcomes the esteemed delegation of Cambodia and thanks them for presenting their national report. As a fellow ASEAN member state, we recognize Cambodia's active participation in ASEAN human rights mechanism. We commend Cambodia for its achievements in enhancing human rights protection and fostering robust cooperation with various human rights mechanisms, including the OSCSR. While acknowledging these efforts, Indonesia recommends the following. 1. Improve access to quality healthcare and education, particularly in rural areas and among vulnerable groups, by reducing financial barriers to education and enhancing healthcare facilities. 2. Intensify efforts to combat human trafficking through rigorous enforcement of relevant laws. 3. Enhance endeavors to safeguard the rights of migrant workers within the sphere of labor rights. Indonesia remains committed to supporting Cambodia and wishes for a successful UPR. I thank you.
I thank Indonesia for your statement. Excellencies, distinguished colleagues, this was the last speaker on my list. So I will now give the floor to the delegation of Cambodia to address observations and comments and to make any final remarks. Sir, the floor is yours.